Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Amplify with Adam. Today I have one of my favorite folks here, Robert Santora from United Manufacturing Solutions. Robert, thanks for joining us today, man. Really excited to talk to you.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Adam. I'm really glad you had me on here.
Awesome, awesome. Well, Robert, so I gave you a little intro, name, company, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been doing this for most of my life, and when I say most of my life, I could think back to my father actually having a shop apron for me that he cut off the bottom of a pair of scissors because it was too long. And that's no joke. I would say that I've probably been in a shop since I was maybe 7-ish years old. And the reason for that is my grandfather had a machine shop. And then when he passed away, my father started his own shop. And now I'm the third generation, I guess you could say, to have a shop now.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
So it's really a family affair.
It really is. Yeah. Yeah. And because of that, it gave me an opportunity to learn from some old timers. So I started manual machines. I spent a good 10 years on manual machines before I touched my first CNC. I think that made a huge difference in how I approach a job and how I approach a program in the CNC now. So that was really cool. I'm glad that I got to do that.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit. I mean, you touched on it with the manual machines to CNC, but what are some of the changes that you've seen? Because 3 generations, that's a long time to be able to see a manufacturing shop and the manufacturing industry evolve. So what are some of the changes that you've seen and, just how people conduct their business or how they approach a part? I think you've got valuable insight there.
Yeah. I mean, it's huge to see it over what's really a small span of time. If you think about it, I'm talking probably from when my grandfather started his first shop in the 1960s till now. Not a huge amount of time has gone by, but the technology has advanced so far. So back in those days, as far as I can remember, I could picture 2 rows of Bridgeports, manual Bridgeports, and they were facing each other, and they were just a long aisle, and every Bridgeport had a guy in front of it. And those guys were churning out parts. Then those parts would go to the grinding department. They were doing fixtures and gauges for aerospace companies. That was their main core of business. But I remember there was a guy at every machine and doing things like with a rotary table, for example, a manual rotary table to put a radius on something, or sign plates, compound sign plates to put angles and holes in. Things that took them a week to do take a few hours now. You talk about 5-axis now, and 5-axis takes care of those angles, and CNC machines cutting radii that would have taken forever to set up on a manual rotary table. So it's huge, the difference now.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on how it changed the way, like that experience, feeds into the way you approach a part. Touch on that a little bit. What is, how do you take that experience to approaching, how you program in CNC nowadays?
It's funny because I feel like today, the guys that are starting out today that are not touching a manual machine have no idea what the feel of a tool is. When I say the feel, I mean turning a hand wheel and feeling that resistance, hearing the sounds and seeing the different colored chips and the noises. And there's so much that go into it. And I think you lose a lot of that touch, that feel with a CNC machine. You're just programming some feed rates, and it's because the book tells you to do it that way, really. Not because you felt how the machine was reacting to it. So it helps me approach things differently because I'm still looking and listening a lot. And there's familiar sounds that go back to those manual days that I think a lot of today's incoming folks don't really understand.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point and so hard to teach, right? Like if you were to try to, because that's like subconscious firing, for you, like you're not even, actively thinking about it. You're just like, oh, that noise means this, which I need to do this. And so that's an instant reaction. And that's really hard to capture that. That's almost art at that point, right? It's very difficult to teach that.
Yeah. I remember when I started, my father and my grandfather, they said, all right, you're going to start out in the bandsaw. And it sounds kind of silly, well, why am I just going to cut stock all day? Well, that's because you learn how different materials cut, and you're going to learn a lot from that. And I did, for a basic example, aluminum versus a steel in the way that they cut, the galling on the blade with aluminum versus the steel being slower slower blade speed and feeding a little bit more slowly and a little bit tougher to cut. So there was a lot to learn just from the bandsaw. That was really a great experience.
Yeah, it almost sounds like they took a lean manufacturing approach, right? So you learn the least complicated job, and then you move to the next most complicated job, right? And then by the end of it, you could do any job, and you've got experience everywhere. So they really, kind of built you up in a lean philosophy there.
Yeah, and actually before the bandsaw, I should say that I started by sweeping the floor. That was my first job.
That could be the least complicated job in the shop. So that's funny.
Yep.
Now,
yep.
So, present day, right? You've started United Manufacturing Solutions. How long have you been in business? What's that journey been like as you've started your shop?
So I started in 2008, right when the economy was really going downhill. Not the best time to start a business, but the other challenge besides the economy was I was 23 years old at the time. Mm-hmm. So trying to find customers with larger companies that'll give work to a 23-year-old kid was tough, because they look at me and they would say, geez, yeah, right. You know how to make a part. Come on.
Right. They're expecting a grizzled veteran to show up from a manufacturing shop,
Yeah. And of course, nobody would believe the story. Like, hey, I've been in the shop since I was a little kid. I know what I'm doing here. Mm-hmm. But I found a customer that believed in me and gave me a shot. And it was my foot in the door to owning my own business. Really, it got me on my feet. That was a large company. And once I developed a portfolio, I was taking pictures of the work that I was doing. I put a little binder together, and I would go to places and say, hey, these are parts that I've really made. And little by little, I was able to grow that business. And as the economy improved, it became a little bit easier for me. But in the beginning, it was tough.
So how did you approach building those relationships with the customers? Was it truly, like see it to believe it by bringing that binder and showing your work? Or, was it give me a small, give me like a little bite-sized job so I can prove, my talent to you and prove the quality? What were some of your strategies there?
It was a little bit of both. Walking in, knocking on doors, driving around, knocking on doors and saying, yeah, here's pictures of what I've done. This is what I'm really good at. I would bring some sample parts along, and I would also do what you just said. I would say, listen, give me a job. I'll give you a fair price. And if the part's wrong, you never have to call me again. Don't pay the bill. Just give me a shot. And I would say my success rate with that was low. It was probably only 10%, really. But
I don't know, 10% on like cold calling that's not a bad close rate, man. That's pretty good. So now that's 13 years ago, right? You're just starting to get your start. How has business changed for you as far as like customer acquisition? Because with social media nowadays, and you've got LinkedIn, but people are also putting up content on Instagram of just them cutting parts, right? So has it changed at all, or have you really acquired the customers that you've got great relationships internally, and so that's not necessarily something that you've really delved into? What's been the change over the 13 years from the customer acquisition side?
So I would say towards the middle of those 13 years, I was really heavy into marketing. I did a lot of social media, website, email blasts, all that stuff. And that worked great. Fast forward to today, I think what we've seen is there's been so many older guys in the business that have retired. Mm-hmm. So many shops have closed for whether it's retirement or financial reasons or the economy. I think that the pool of manufacturers has gotten a little bit smaller. And when I say manufacturers, I mean small job shops like myself.
Right.
That coupled with the experience that I have in the industry now and the time that I have behind me, it's become more word of mouth. So I have a lot less advertising out there and more, hey, a shop might say, hey, we can't do this job, but I know a guy that could. And that's how I get a lot of my work now also. And of course, I have to mention Xometry because, I mean, Xometry is just, it has changed the game so much in that regard for acquiring work and things of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, what's also interesting is you touched on the network of manufacturers, right? It's so interesting to me because when you look at like a lot of small businesses, you know, if I'm a bakery and there's another bakery in town, I'm never going to be like, hey, go check out that other bakery, right? But if a shop's like, hey, I can't do this, but I know Robert, there's so much of that support system and networking within manufacturing that I think is really unique to our industry.
Yeah, and it's great. I mean, it happens all the time. And I do the same thing. If there's something that comes across my desk that's too large for me or something that I just don't really specialize in, I do the exact same thing and return the favors. It happens all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love it. And I love hearing those stories because it's not only, you know, work, a lot of times it's knowledge as well. Hey, I'm you know, on the Reddit threads in our own community, Facebook groups, people are like, hey, I'm trying to, you know, machine this part or thread this mill. Like, you know, what do I do here? How do I approach this? Right. So it's really powerful to see that support system. Now, when we look at the future for United Manufacturing, you know, the next year or so, what kind of interests you or what are you looking at as far as growth or expansion of technology? You know, what's on the horizon for you?
So this, I'll start by saying this past year, I moved into 5-axis machining. Mm-hmm. And that's been a huge game changer for me. It's the ROI on a 5-axis, in my opinion, is something that I just could never live without in the future. So I think the future holds more of that, more axis machining. The other thing that I really want to do is get my ITAR certification. I know that Xometry is doing something along those lines that I'd like to really take them up on. Yeah. So that's a big thing that I'd like to do also. I hear that there's a lot of ITAR work out there that I'm really not seeing yet because I'm not certified. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of folks are moving to both ITAR certification and also investing in the 5-axis because you're right, it totally changes the game there. And so does that look like, it sounds like you've kind of maybe not reached your horizon, but you did it within the last year of purchasing that 5-axis. Now, when you were looking at that, that's a CapEx project for a lot of folks. What were you thinking about, and what were some of the things that you considered as you were making that large purchase?
Well, a lot of the work that I like to do is more complex. Mm-hmm. I like a challenge. I don't do production work because to me, it just doesn't satisfy my craving for a challenge. Mm-hmm. I like to do something different every day. So I was always going after work that had multiple setups or involved setups, compound angles, things like that. So when I looked at 5-axis, I was seeing it as something that I could use for multiple setups in one. Put the part in and get to those angles more easily. Once I did that, that turned into different tool paths and multiple machining also. So to me, it was just a no-brainer. When I saw the technology and I saw how it worked, it was such an easy decision for me.
That's awesome. I couldn't tell if I was drifting there or if your camera was. I felt like
I'm sorry.
No, it's all good, man. It's all good. So, you know, Robert, you've clearly got, you know, from 7 years old to 13 years of owning your own shop, you've got a wealth of knowledge. You know, if you were talking to 23-year-old Robert again, or to someone that's looking to get into the industry, maybe start their own shop, what's a couple pieces of advice that you would pass along to that person?
Well, I would say, first of all, go slow. Don't try to conquer the entire world at once. That's a good way to get in trouble. And stay away from debt as much as you can. It's easy to go to the bank and take on a couple $100,000 worth of debt and buy all these fancy machines before you have the work for them. Mm-hmm. So go slow in the sense that you should maybe buy a used machine and get some work in and start paying that machine off, and then move up into something a little bit bigger, something a little bit newer. And then the other thing is, don't bite off more than you can chew work-wise. Don't take on work that you know that you can't do, whether it's outside of your skill set or it's just too much for your capacity, because going late on a job or blowing a job off completely is just going to hurt you in the end. It doesn't do anybody any good. So if you make a commitment to a customer, make sure that you can fulfill it. That's a huge one.
Yeah, I think you're so right, because if you flash back to the start of your shop, right, if you blow one of those first jobs, that word of mouth in town becomes really hard to combat that, right? So you really want to get quick wins that you know you can do and provide really, really great customer service and quality to that customer. So I love that advice. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a lesson that I learned the hard way. We all make mistakes, and I've been there too. I've bitten off more than I can chew. I've taken jobs that were too large for me and gotten into trouble that way. It's a hard lesson to learn, but when you learn it the hard way, you remember it, and it translates from the business today.
And how did you handle those jobs? I mean, did you call the customer like kind of the moment that you realized that it was a little bit too much for you, and just say, hey, I need a little bit more time, or I need to pivot? You know, what was kind of your strategy there to try to win that customer back?
Honesty.
Yeah.
Honesty, best policy as far as I'm concerned. So in those situations, this is going back a few years now, but I would call and say, hey, you know I promised you this on this date, but I'm a little bit behind and I need a little bit more time. Or is there something that you want to outsource to somebody else? You know, let's work together. I'm just trying to be honest with you. And we got, you know, there's nothing that is too big to let your pride take it over and just hide it, you know, because eventually they're just going to get mad at you.
Yeah, it's going to come to light eventually. So take it on early, man. Well, Robert, I could literally talk to you all day, but I know that you've got, you know, parts running probably today, and so I want to give you your time back. But thank you so much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed being able to talk to you a little bit and be able to learn about United Manufacturing Solutions. So would love to talk again in the future, and thanks again for coming on the show.
Yeah, and it's been great. Thank you again.
Awesome. Well, guys, tune in next week for another episode of Amplify with Adam. Thank you so much.